Am I audible, Dr. Smriti?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah. Dr. Smriti, thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to interact with such a broad base of faculty members from all across the country. So without wasting any time, I would like to, start my session. So I'll first share my PPT. Is it visible to everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'll begin with the research findings from three universities, Harvard University, Carnegie Mellon, and Stanford Research Center, where all have concluded that 85% of the job success comes from well-developed social soft skills and people skills, and technical and knowledge, that is the hard skills, account for only 15% of the overall job success. Right. So in my session, I'll be talking about one of the most important soft skills that organizations these days look for in their prospective as well as the current employees, and that is teamwork. Now, as most of the work processes in the organizations are organized or structured around work teams, that's why organizations these days expect their employees to be a good team player, right? But teamwork has never been easy. And in the recent years, it has become much more complex. And the trends that make it complex, they seem to continue. For example, teams have become increasingly more global, virtual, and project driven, right? So the teams of present are very different from the teams of past. They are now far more diverse, dispersed, digital, and dynamic in terms of their membership. And all these qualities, make it difficult for members to collaborate effectively, right? And these teams in the organizations face a number of workplace challenges, such as, various decision making challenges, problem solving challenges, and we will be talking about some of these challenges here in this session, right? So mainly I'll begin with the concept of teamwork, right? And then you will also learn about how to build, participate in, and lead effective teams, right? And then we will look at some of the challenges to teamwork in the organizations, right? And then you will also learn about how, teams can solve complex problems and make complex decisions in very difficult situations, right? So I'll talk about all these concepts or all these topics in my session. So to begin with, let us begin with the concept of team so that we all develop a common understanding of the term. So what happens is most of us have a tendency to, call an amorphous group as team. Why? Because we think that, the label is so motivating and, energizing. But just calling a group a team does not automatically ensure that it will perform well, right? Just because, someone calls group a team, groups don't become a team, right? So what is the main difference between teams that perform and the other groups that don't, right? So this is the subject that has been given, very little attention in the past, right? Most of us pay very little attention to this particular difference between, team and the group, right? And the part of the problem is that the word team and the concept of team is so familiar to people that people use it so loosely, and that comes in the way of, effectively learning and applying this concept to, to explain good performance, right? So let's begin with the definition that was proposed by Katzenbach and Smith back in 1993, right? So where they defined team as a small number of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, performance goals, and approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable, right? So to better understand to make better decisions, whether when or how to encourage or use teams, it is important for us, to be more precise about what a team is and what is not. And in this, you can clearly identify three main highlighted components, right? So here, these researchers have mainly, highlighted three main components: complementary skills, common purpose, and mutual accountability, right? So the essence of team lies in common commitment, right? Without it, groups perform as individuals, and with it, they become, powerful a unit of collective performance. And this kind of commitment requires a purpose, or I would say a meaningful purpose in which, team members can believe, right? So the common purpose is one of the essential, I would say, is the characteristics of an effective team as proposed by these researchers. Now, apart from common purpose, you can also find the term performance goals here. Now, best teams also translate this common purpose into specific performance goals. And why this is important? So as to keep the team focused, right? Translating this common purpose into specific performance goals is required for teams to remain inspired or focused, right? If they do not know what they are working toward and they do not have explicit goals, it is really difficult for the team to remain inspired, right? So I'll talk about some of these components in more detail a little later in my presentation. So let us come to the second important component, that is complementary skills, right? So when it comes to composition of the team, right, you need to have right mix of skills, right? You need to have all members with skills to be able to fulfill all the required roles in the team, right? So each member is required to possess a complementary skills needed to do the team job, right? So every individual need not possess, superlative degree of technical or functional or problem solving, or I would say interpersonal skills. But the team needs a healthy dose of each of these, right? So teams have different needs and members need to be selected so as to be able to fulfill all the required roles in the team, right? So this was the second main component, that is right mix of skills you need in order for team to be effective. And then lastly, Katzenbach and Smith, they defined a team in terms of accountability as well, right? So mutual accountability for shared purpose and goals is something that is, a hallmark of team discipline. So rather than simply being individually accountable for personal goals and outcomes, right? All individuals take the responsibility for the overall team goal and the results, right? And when team has common purpose, specific performance goals, and a common approach, this mutual accountability grows as a natural counterpart, right? So I'll be explaining these components every now and then in my presentation. So I'll quickly talk about one more important component that is left in the definition. That is the first word. If you notice here, it is written a small number of people, right? So team also has to do with the size, right? Identifying the right number, right? So the size issues I'll be talking about in more detail, but here by size, having a large group of people can have, trouble interacting constructively as a group and, doing much less real work together. That's why here they have also focused on the number. So I'll talk about it. Now, if you look at this model, right? So they have mainly, so this is the team effectiveness model that is proposed by the same researchers, Katzenbach and Smith. In their book, they have proposed this particular model of team effectiveness, wisdom of teams. So if you'd like, you can refer to this particular book for more details. So here they have, presented team effectiveness in terms of a triangular diagram where, the edges, they present the large deliverables of almost any kind of team, right? The collective product, personal growth, and performance results. And in order to achieve this, right, they have identified three main components, that is skills, accountability, and commitment, which are on the sides of each of the triangle, right? So this is what I explained when talking about the definition of the team. Now, to understand how teams deliver extra level of performance, we must distinguish between teams and other forms of working groups, right? And that distinction turns on performance results. So if I talk about any working group, right? So any working group's performance is a function of what its members do as individuals, right? And it is merely the summation of each group member's individual contribution. Why? Because work group have no need or opportunity to engage in collective work that requires joint effort, right? So there is no positive synergy that would create an overall level of performance that is greater than the sum of the inputs. Whereas if you look at in case of work teams, there is a coordinated effort, right? And which generates a positive synergy in team, right? And here, because of this coordinated or collective effort, the team effort results in a level of performance that is greater than the sum of individual inputs, right? Here, 2 plus 2 is not 4. It becomes more than 4, 5, 6, or 7, right? And this positive synergy is the reason why most of the organizations have structured their work processes around work teams, right? Why this is so? Because teams offer organizations a potential to create a level of performance, a higher level of performance without any significant increase in the inputs. Inputs remain same, but teams work collectively so as to produce a level of output that is greater than the sum of inputs, right? So this is the most important characteristics that differentiate work groups from teams. Now, I talked about when we were talking about the definition of the team, one of the critical components was accountability, right? So the work groups and teams also differ in terms of the accountability. If you see in case of work groups, the focus is on individual goals and accountabilities. Here, members do not take responsibility for the results other than their own, right? But work teams differ fundamentally from working groups because they require both individual as well as mutual accountability. Here, individuals hold themselves as well as others accountable for the goals or the outcomes, right? And then the difference also lies in terms of the purpose, right? So what is the purpose of a work group? The work group members, they basically come together, to share information, perspectives, or insights to make decisions that help each person perform within his or her area of responsibility, right? So that each person performs well his or her job, right? But the essence of team is common commitment, right? So without it, groups perform as individual, and with this common commitment or common purpose or compelling direction, they become powerful unit of collective performance. And this kind of commitment, as I said, requires a meaningful purpose in which everyone can believe, right? And the difference, as you can see in the diagram, also lies in terms of the skills of the members of a work team and groups, right? So as I said, in case of team, the skills should always be complementary, right? So if you have seen a lot of teams, for example, in organizations, you can look at cross-functional teams where people from different departments come together to solve an organizational problem, right? For example, if you have heard of quality circles, right? So people from different departments, they come together to solve quality related problems. Similarly, if you look at cricket team, right? Cricket team has complementary skills. You need to have bowlers, you need to have batsmen, you need to have fielders, you need to have wicket keepers, right? So certain minimum level of complementary skills are required for teams to function. Whereas in case of work groups, this is not the case, right? Here the skills of the members are random, and they can be random and varied, right? Now, apart from positive synergy, which makes organizations, produce a level of output that is greater than, to produce a level of output greater, a very higher level of output without any significant increase in input, there are a lot of other reasons why, organizations make use of teams. So if you look at the slide, so these are, some of the reasons that many organizations like Xerox, like almost every organization these days, is making use of teams for one or the other reasons, right? Now, apart from these gains, what else teams offer to organizations, right? So why use teams? So these are some of the other benefits of using a team in an organization. Right, I won't go into much details of these. It is usually assumed that, none of us is as smart as all of us, right? So it is assumed that teams typically outperform individuals. Of course, there are conditions, there are certain qualifications that need to be met for this to happen. I'll discuss about that. It is not always the case, right? Teams, organizations, they say that teams make use of employee talents better, right? And teams are also considered to be very flexible in terms of, they can quickly assemble and disband, right? So they help organization in responding quickly to the organizational change, right? Apart from these, managers also say that, teams provide them a way to increase employee involvement and, democratize their organization, right? But an important note here is teams are not always effective. Right, I'll talk about this because there is plethora of academic research which says that, teams are not able to achieve their true potential, right? I will talk about that. So this slide clearly says that teams are not always the solution, right? So when to make use of teams, when to create teams. So if you create a team in a situation where individual can do the job, right? So in that case, you will be perfectly solving a wrong problem, right? So when to make use of teams? So these are the special conditions where, teamwork is really required, right? The tasks, when you have tasks that are highly interdependent, so that, members need to work together. It cannot be individually accomplished, right? And work requires some problem solving or some skilled activities where members need to leverage their knowledge, skills, and the judgment, right? Now, there are different types of teams in an organization. I won't go into the details of these. I'll quickly introduce these to you. There are problem-solving teams. There are self-managed work teams. You can read more about this. These are available in all the books in the area of OB, so you can read about them. So I won't explain this here. There are cross-functional teams. You can understand the term, you can understand the concept from the term itself. And then there are virtual teams, right? So the teams that make use of computer technology to integrate, right? So this is what has become very popular these days. So rather than going into the details of each of these, I would like to move on to the next important, component of my session. That is, what are the factors that explain team effectiveness, or what makes teams successful, right? Or what are the characteristics of an effective team, right? So if you see the literature, a lot of research has been done in this direction and a lot of models have been proposed in past. One of the model I just discussed while discussing the definition, that was the Katzenbach and Smith model, right? And then where they talked about, the importance of skills, accountability, and commitment for team effectiveness. And then there was one more model called as GRPI model of team effectiveness, proposed by Rubin et al. Right here, here GRPI actually stands for goals, roles, procedures, and interpersonal relationships. Right, so here they again emphasized upon the need for a common purpose. Right, so there must be clear objectives and intentions regarding individual and team goals. And apart from this, they should be combined with, robust and open communication about the priorities and expectations. Right, and then the next component as per this model is roles. Right, the entire team must have a defined structure. The roles and responsibilities should be clearly defined. The team should have a clear structure of leadership. Right, and then comes the processes. There has to be clear decision making or problem solving processes as well as work procedures. Right, and lastly they talked about importance of interpersonal relationship for an effective team. Right, because team performance is based upon good communication, trust, and flexibility between the team members. Right, now GRPI model is mainly used because of its simplicity, and it is great when starting a team or when you encounter a team related problem with an unknown cause. Right, and then a lot of other models were proposed, but I have captured here some of the important ones. So if you look at Hackman's work in this area, so he talked about some of the important secrets of teamwork. So he mainly talked about the importance of compelling direction, strong structure, and supportive context. Right, and this model was later modified by adding an additional component of shared mindset by Haas and Mortensen, given the current change in the structure of team these days. So they proposed the idea of 4D teams, which I was talking about. The diverse, dynamic, digital, right? These teams. So I'll talk about each of these components very quickly. Now, I've already talked about the common purpose, but here, the foundation, according to this particular model, the foundation for every great team, is a direction that energizes, orients, and engages its members, right? And teams cannot be inspired if they do not know what they are working towards and they do not have specific work goals in mind. Right, and these goals, if you, most of you must be from I assume that management background, so you must have read about the goal setting theory. Right, so these goals should be challenging, right, but not so difficult that team becomes dispirited. Right, and they also must be consequential. What do I mean by the term consequential here? People have to care about achieving the goal, right? Whether because, they stand to gain extrinsic rewards like recognition, pay, or promotion, or intrinsic rewards of satisfaction or a sense of meaning, right? And if we talk about the diverse, dispersed, digital, and dynamic teams, direction is especially crucial because it's easy for far-flung members from dissimilar backgrounds to hold different views of the groups, right? And solving this tension requires a frank discussion to reach a consensus on how team as a whole defined its objective. right? And then the next component Hackman talked about was strong structure, right? So team needs a right mix and number of people, optimally designed task processes, and the norms that discourage dysfunctional dynamics and promote positive dynamics. Right? I will talk about the dysfunctional dynamics or the process losses that can take place in a team very soon. Right? And then comes the supportive context. Right? Almost every model, if you take up that, every group to some extent depends upon the outside resources for its performance. Right? So there has to be a supportive context in terms of, a right performance management system maybe that reinforces good performance, or an information system that provides, or that fulfills the data requirements of a group, right? Or sometimes teams also need, material resources, for example, technological assistance or funding, right? So these also need to be provided to the team on time. And then comes the last, which was added by these researchers in the model, shared mindset. Why this has become important? Although these three components are, they'll pay the way for team to be successful, according to Hackman, right? So why this particular component was added? So because of the distance and diversity, as well as, the digital communication and changing memberships in the teams. All these qualities, they actually make these teams, prone to the problem of us versus them thinking and incomplete information, right? And the solution to both the problems of us versus them thinking and incomplete information lies in shared mindset, right? And how leaders can do so? Leaders can build a shared mindset by fostering a common identity and common understanding. Right? Because in past, what used to happen, teams typically, consisted of stable set of fairly homogeneous members who worked face to face and tended to have a very similar mindset. But that's no longer the case, right? Teams now often perceive themselves as not as one cohesive group, but as several small subgroups, right? And we are also inclined to view our own subgroups, whether it's function, our unit, or our region or culture, right, more positively than others. And that habit often, creates tension and hinders collaboration, right? And then comes the problem of incomplete information, right? And incomplete information is likewise more prevalent in these 4D teams. Many times what happens is certain members have very important information that others do not, right? Because they are experts in their specialized areas, or because, they are geographically dispersed or new, or, both. So that information won't provide much value if it is not communicated to the rest of the team, right? After all, shared information is the cornerstone of effective collaboration. It gives, a group a frame of reference that allows the group to interpret situations and decisions correctly, right? And help people understand other better, and, greatly increases the efficiency. So now, in the current times, the digital dependence has often, impeded this information exchange. In face-to-face team, participants can rely on non-verbal and contextual cues to provide insight into, what's going on. When we talk, or when we, walk into an in-person meeting, for example, right? We can immediately sense the individual and collective moods of the people in the room, right? The information that we use consciously or not to tailor subsequent interactions, right? So having to rely on digital communication erodes the transmission of this crucial type of intelligence, right? And there are many ways in which, leaders can foster shared identity and, shared understanding, and break down the barriers to cooperation and information exchange. I'll talk about the role of leader in the process a little later in my presentation, right? So they gave this 4-component formula so as to assess whether your team is effective or not. So do we have a common goal that is clear, challenging, and consequential, right? Does the team has strong structure? Do we have right number and mix of people? Right? Are people responsible for the task right from the beginning to end? Right? And do we have clear norms that prevent dysfunctional dynamics? Right? And then supportive context. Do we have adequate resources, information, training that we need? Or are there appropriate rewards for success and appropriate punishments for failures? Right? And lastly, shared mindset. Do the team members have a strong identity? Right? And do they share information readily with one another and understand each other's constraints and context? Right? So these were some of the models, and there are a lot of other models, but I have actually summarized the key components of all of them in the present slide. So, the key components of effective teams can be categorized into these three general categories: the contextual factors, the team composition, and the team processes, right? So some of these I have already discussed while discussing some of these models. So as I said, teams are a part of large organization system, and every team relies on resources outside the group to sustain, right? And this support includes, timely information, proper equipment, adequate staffing, training, technology support, funding, etc. Right? So adequate resources are required for team to function effectively, right? Any scarcity of resources can directly reduce the ability of the team to perform its job effectively and achieve its goals, right? And then comes the importance of a performance management system for an effective team, right? The performance management system and reward system should be such that it should recognize both the individual as well as group accomplishments. So traditionally in organizations, we have individually oriented systems, right? So we need a hybrid system, which rewards individuals' exceptional contributions and also rewards the team for the exceptional performance. Right, so you can go for profit sharing plans, then there are gain sharing plans, right? So these are some of the compensation plans or group compensation plans that organizations can use for promoting team cohesiveness. Then comes the importance of structure that I already discussed. So leadership and structure are particularly important for any team, right? Team cannot function if they cannot agree on who is to do what and ensure that all members share workload, right? So teams need to have optimally designed tasks and processes, and leadership plays an important role here. So rather than, it has been found that, rather than having a single leader structure, teams that establish shared leadership by effectively delegating it are more effective, right? I will share a story with you that makes the concept of shared leadership more clear to you. And then comes the role of trust. So members of effective teams must trust each other. A climate of trust is must for members to, take risk or expose their vulnerabilities, to have belief that others won't take advantage of them, right? To seek help or to admit their mistakes, right? So a climate of trust is definitely needed for bonding among the members to be strong, right? And then apart from contextual factors, right, composition also matters, right? So that is why managers or you as team leaders should also be cautious while selecting the team members. Everyone cannot be a team player, that you need to keep in mind, right? Members have their preferences. Some individuals prefer to work as individuals, right? And if such individuals form part of the team, it can be really, demoralizing for others, right? So while selecting members, apart from their skills, personality, you need to look at their preferences to work in a team as well, right? And then comes the personality, right? So you must be aware of the big five framework of a personality. So it is said that based upon years of research that conscientious individuals who are open to experience, right, they are likely to form good team members, right? So team members with conscientious and open individuals are more effective as compared to others. Plus, a small or a minimal level of agreeableness is also important. Somebody was saying something. You can note down your questions. We can take it up at the end of the session. Right. So as I said, personalities of the individuals also matter, right? So individuals who are disagreeable, right? Such teams are, they have been found to be less effective. They have been found to disintegrate, right? So one bad apple can destroy the entire bunch. So you need to be really careful while selecting the team members, and right mix of skills and right size of team matters, right? And then because with size comes a number of problems that I'll quickly look into. And then the third set of factors relate to the processes, the ongoing events in the team that affect the team effectiveness, right? So some of these components have already been explained: compelling direction, that is common purpose, then specific goals. Then apart from these, it is important for team to have team efficacy, right? Team efficacy is team's confidence in their abilities to be successful in performing a particular task, right? So if teams feel confident about their abilities to perform a particular task, they are more likely to be successful, right? What can organizations do to improve the efficacy level? They can, provide teams a lot of small assignments or opportunities to be successful, right? So when teams see that they can do a task successfully a number of times, that builds their confidence. Apart from this, organizations can also train the team members or provide them with the required skills and knowledge that again will make them more confident of doing a particular task, right? And then comes the conflict level. So conflict on the team is not necessarily bad. As you have people, you have a heterogeneous team of people with different knowledge base, or you can have demographic diversity in the team, right? So conflict is not always bad. That you should understand. Conflict has a complex relationship with team performance, right? So if conflict is over the components of a task or how the task gets done, right? So we call it as task or process conflict, right? So moderate levels of task or process conflict can actually stimulate discussion. They can promote critical assessment of problems and options, and they can lead to better team decisions, right? And on the other hand, there is, I'll take a session on conflict management where I'll be explaining in more detail about different types of conflicts. So apart from task and process conflict, we have another type of conflict, that is relationship conflict, right? So when conflict percolates down to the level of, interpersonal incompatibilities, it leads to tension, animosity among members, right? And this type of conflict is almost always dysfunctional, right? So both too much and too little conflict have been found to inhibit team performance, right? Moderate levels of task or cognitive conflict can actually help the team to be viable or self-critical and be creative, right? So when teams are particularly working on a creative assignment, it is important for teams to have a certain level of, or I would say a moderate level of conflict, right? So this is all about the factors that affect team effectiveness as per the past literature, right? Now, if I was talking about the academic literature where, the studies have demonstrated that teams often fail to achieve their potential, right? And for instance, if you see, some studies have found that best individual on a team typically outperforms the group as a whole, right? So what constitutes this process losses? What are these process losses? right? So teams usually describe this particular phenomena where they perform below their actual potential in terms of certain process losses, which can happen because of a number of reasons, right? So what are those reasons? So now we will talk about some of the challenges to teamwork or impediments to teamwork, right? So these process losses can occur because of a number of reasons such as groupthink, social loafing, inability of the team members to handle information and interest asymmetries, right? So there are information sharing problems, there are information processing challenges, then, there can be goal conflict issues in the teams. And also when, group members get mired in unproductive conflict, as I just talked about. So these are some of the challenges to the teamwork that I'll be now talking about. So now, as faculty of management or organization behavior or communication, you must be much aware of the concept of group think, right? So let me begin with the concept of conformity to pressure. So when we are part of a team, right? So there is always a pressure for conformity because we desire membership in the group or team here, right? So we want to be accepted by the group, right? And because of this reason, there is a pressure for conformity to the group norms, right? So groups exercise significant pressure on individuals to abide by its norms, right? So they pressurize individuals to change their attitudes or behaviors in line with the group standards, right? And these pressures for conformity, right? This was clearly demonstrated in one of the classic experiments by Solomon Asch, right? So he did one particular experiment where he held two cards in front of a group of people, right? So one card had one line, right? And the other card had three lines, right? And one of the three lines in the second card was exactly identical to that of the one line card, a line on the other card, right? So for example, if I call line on the three line cards as A, B, and C. So line on the one line card as X. So X was suppose equal to that of C, suppose, right? So the length of X was equal to that of C, right? So these two cards were held in front of a group of people, right? So several set of exercises were done, and you will notice that, under normal circumstances, less than 1% of the people will make mistakes in identifying which line in this particular card resembles the line in the other card, right? But what happens when members start giving obvious wrong answers, right? So this exercise was conducted in number of groups of 6 or 7 people. So the first set of people in a group, they all gave correct answer, that line X resembles line C, right? Similarly, second group members also gave the same answer, right? But in the third set, the first member of the third group, he gave an obvious wrong answer. He said that line X on card 1 resembles line B, suppose, right? So this was an obvious wrong answer, right? So the next subject in the group, right? So the next member of the group also gave the wrong answer, right? So now the third member in the group has this dilemma whether to go ahead with the opinion of the majority or give a correct answer, right? It has been found through this research that 75% of the times the unsuspecting subjects have given, one of the answers that conforms to the view of majority. Right, so from this you can clearly identify how strong are such pressures for conformity. We want acceptance by the group. We do not want to be visibly different, right? We want to be seen as one of the groups, right? And such pressures for conformity actually deters the group from critically appraising, deviant, minority, or unpopular views, right? So this particular phenomena where group fails to critically appraise such unusual views is called as groupthink, right? So when you are not able to consider the views or dissenting views, right, this is likely to be a serious impediment to team performance. Right here, people will, because of the pressures for conformity, people will suppress their views, even if they differ with the majority. Right? They won't express their dissenting views. Right? And when such people are really able, they are such knowledgeable people, and when their views are suppressed, group performance actually suffers badly. That is why groupthink is called as one of the diseases that affects group performance. Right? And then another important challenge to teamwork is social loafing. Now, what is social loafing? Now, if you go by the definition, it is an individual's tendency to expend less effort while working in a group than working individually. Right? So when we work in a group, sometimes we expend less effort as compared to when we are given a task to be accomplished individually. Right? So this particular phenomena is called as social loafing. Why this happens? Right? So in order to see whether it actually exists, Ringelmann was one particular behavioral scientist who conducted a series of experiments in this area. So you must be aware of Ringelmann rope pulling experiment, right? So in this particular experiment, he asked one person to pull the rope, right? So one person was able to exert a force of, for example, 63 kg on the rope, right? So now Ringelmann expected that when 3 people will pull the rope, they will be able to exert 3 times of the force that is exerted by a single individual, right? So he expected 63 cross 3 to be the force to be exerted in the 3-person situation, right? And similarly, he asked 8 people to pull the rope, right, and expected that 8 people will exert 8 times the force that is exerted by a single individual. But to his surprise, what he found that in case of 3 individuals pulling the rope, the average force exerted by a single individual came down to 51 kg, and in case of 8 individuals, the average force came down to around 31 kg. Right? So although group productivity increased, so 51 plus 51 plus 51, the overall output will be greater than 63 kg definitely, but the individual productivity experienced diminishing returns. Right? So this particular phenomenon is social loafing. Now, why this happens? Now, there are 2 main reasons for it. So you must have heard about equity theory in motivation. Right? So when we work in a group, when we see that some individuals are not putting enough effort, right? They are lazy, inept, they are not doing any work, right? So we try to re-establish the equity by reducing our effort. When they are not working, why should I put all the effort? Right? So this is called as, so this is one of the reasons for reducing your effort in a group situation. And then secondly, in group situations, there is a dispersion of responsibility or accountability, right? One single individual cannot be held accountable for the group outcome. It is difficult to visibly identify the contribution of a single individual, right? So that's why individuals tend to become free riders and coast on the group efforts, right? So this is the other particular reason where, the relationship between the input and the output is very clouded. Group output is very clouded. Right? So this is the another reason that cripples team performance. Now coming to next, information and interest asymmetries. Right? So sometimes teams are not able to deal with information and interest asymmetries. Now what are these? These 2 particular terms have been actually, borrowed from the negotiation literature. So many organizations, face the challenge of having members with different sources of information or partially conflicting goals. Right? So such teams do not always achieve their potential for synergy. Right? So what are these situations? So let me first explain what do I mean by the term information asymmetry and interest asymmetry. Yes. So when teams try to solve problems collectively, the members, may have all the same information available to them. But in many cases, each member has access to private data not possessed by others in the group. Right? So when different members have distinct unshared information, right, we describe this particular condition as information asymmetry. Right? Similarly, each member's goals and objectives may be similar or they might be quite different. Right? And their goals may conflict to a substantial degree. Right? And this particular situation, we describe it as interest asymmetry. Right? So when group members have divergent goals, it is called as interest asymmetry. Right? So when this happens, when team members can have, we were talking about common purpose, common goals, compelling direction. So now certainly what I'm talking about is partially conflicting goals. So while team members do have one or more shared objectives, including optimization of the overall performance of the firm, they can also care a great deal about the goals of their particular subunit of the organization. Right? So this is a particular example where goals may actually be in partial conflict with each other. Right? Now, yes. So now coming to why this is a problem, why teams are not able to handle such information and interest asymmetry. So let us come to the information sharing problems. Right? So we assemble teams because we wish to pool expertise. Right? So in that sense, we do not want to organize a team of people who, all possess the same information and expertise. Right? Instead, we want to select team members who bring different knowledge and perspectives to the table. That is asymmetric information, right? So information asymmetry is not a bad thing. It is actually an advantage. That's why teams are actually formed, right? So if you look at top management team literature, many scholars have actually heralded the promise of assembling demographically heterogeneous teams. Why? Because, presumably demographic diversity signals the existence of divergent expertise and vantage points that could be, brought to bear on difficult strategic issues facing firms. So this heterogeneity yields divergent thinking and the pooling of broader base of information and knowledge, resulting in better strategic choices. Right? But if you look at the literature, most of the times it is said that, heterogeneous teams perform well. But if you look at the literature, the findings are really conflicting. Studies yield conflicting results with regard to, impact of demographic heterogeneity and team performance. They may not always result in higher performance. There are, many reasons for this conflicting finding. One could be that, some teams encounter process losses when trying to bring people together who possess, a wide variety of information and expertise. Right? So here, so where lies the information sharing problem? Right? So one of the psychologists has actually documented one type of process loss that is experienced by the team. So this particular process loss, we call it as common information effect. Now, what is this common information effect? Now, this particular effect states that, privately held information tends not to be shared with other members, right? So research shows that groups often focus their discussion on information that is commonly possessed by all members. Right? So most of the time goes in discussing the information that is commonly available to all. Individuals, typically they do not disclose the data that they possess, but which others do not. Right? And this incomplete disclosure occurs even when team members have a common goal. And when this happens, when members do not pool their information effectively, team performance suffers, right? When members fail to disclose privately held information. Because some tasks and decisions, in fact, most of the tasks and decisions require integration of the team members' knowledge and expertise, right? Even one member's failure to disclose and share privately held information can impair the team's abilities to accomplish its task effectively. Now, what is the reason for such suboptimal sharing of? Yes, so what is the reason for such suboptimal information sharing within groups? So there are two main reasons, if you see. So many a times, individuals may take it for granted what they know, not realizing that others don't possess the same knowledge. Right? So they may not be aware that others do not have the knowledge that they actually have. Right? So this could be one reason. And in some cases, a lack of psychological safety may cause some team members to remain silent and afraid to interrupt the flow of discussion to offer their input. So what is psychological safety? Now, psychological safety refers to a shared belief within a team that the team climate is safe for taking interpersonal risks. Right? So when teams have low psychological safety, members may worry that they will be marginalized or rebuked if they speak up. Right? Or they ask a question, or they express a dissenting, or perhaps, change the course of discussion. Right? So many factors can inhibit psychological safety. That may include, the leader's behavior, leader's style, or, organizational hierarchy can also play a role here. Or, status differences among the members can also inhibit psychological safety. So I will talk about how, we can build psychological safety so that teams are more open and transparent, right? So that they can pool in all information effectively a little later when we come to the solutions to these challenges. Now, this was the problem related to information sharing, why members do not pool in information effectively. Now, the second problem was related to interest asymmetry, right? So when members have conflicting goals or partially conflicting goals, not entirely, right? So as we saw that Hackman said that teams must have clear and engaging direction, right? A powerful shared goal in order to be effective. But in many situations, common objective does not preclude individuals from possessing many other different private objectives, right? So some of these objectives may clash, right? And you may have members that possess a mix of shared and private objectives that are independent of or in conflict with those of the other members. Right? Again, I'll borrow from the negotiation literature here. So what happens when goals are in conflict with each other? Right? So there are two types of behaviors that have been described in the negotiation literature: value creating behaviors and value claiming behaviors. Right? So these are the two types of behaviors that arise when parties do not have common goal symmetry. Right? So when parties, here by parties, I mean the parties involved in the negotiation, right? So when parties have some interest in common, They can engage in behavior that discovers and capitalizes on win-win situation for all the parties involved. But if parties possess the goals that are incongruent with those of their counterparts, right, then they may try to advance their own interest at the expense of the others. Right? So there are both the options available with the parties, either to grow the pie as well as to maximize the size of one's own slice of that pie. Right? So this growing the pie, advancing the common interest. So such behaviors are called as value creating behaviors. Right? On the other hand, when parties try to maximize or advance their own interest at the expense of others, we call such behaviors as value claiming behaviors. Right? So now in teams with asymmetric goals, right, or interests, value claiming behavior can take place at the expense of value creating behavior. Right? People can become so focused on satisfying their personal goals that they squelch the opportunities to develop alternatives that can be beneficial to all the members of the team. Right? And when this happens, sufficient levels of critical or creative thinking does not take place, because the different team members get entrenched in their positions. Right? And behind the scene political behavior may begin to take place as people lobby others, right, to attempt to build coalition or so as to advance their personal agendas. Right? And these behind the scene political behavior can actually influence the transparency of the group decision making process, which can really prove detrimental. Right? And when the goals are dysfunctional, conflict also comes into picture. Right? In this particular case, when the goals are in conflict with each other, the cognitive or task conflict, which I said that moderate level is always good. So these kind of conflicts may deteriorate quickly into affective or interpersonal level, right? Which is always dysfunctional. Right? So this is the problem with the goal conflict. But again, conflicting goals can be a strength for the team. Why this is so? If we constitute a team that consists of members with the same interest, that puts a limit on the range of skills and abilities that these team members bring to the table. Right? So divergent goals are actually a strength for the team, and we should not try to suppress that. What is the solution? Teams can, when the interests are shared, right, when members can talk about their personal goals more freely, right, in that case the entire team can work out alternatives, or they can come up with mutually beneficial outcomes for the entire team. Right? Then coming to the importance of psychological safety here in dealing with the problems of information and interest asymmetries. Right? So these are the problems. So what role psychological safety can play here? Right? So these were the challenges. I have talked about all of these. So here is one more challenge listed here: information processing challenges. Right? Teams also sometimes suffer from incomplete data or data overload. Right? In that case, also working collaboratively can often help individuals to cope up with cognitive challenges associated with irrelevant or incomplete data. Right? So now coming to the solutions. How can teams deal with these challenges? Right? There will always be information asymmetry. There will be always partially conflicting goals somewhere or the other. Right? There will be a tendency for groupthink. There will be a tendency for social loafing, especially when the size of the group is large. Typically, it is said that a size of 5 to 9 members is more appropriate to do something productive. Right? So when size crosses a particular number, which according to research varies from 5 to 7 or 5 to 9, right? So then these tendencies increase, right? So these large groups often face barriers related to poor communication, right? Coordination issues, right? And there is increased tendency to free ride. Now, how to deal with these challenges? So as I said, psychological safety is really important in any team. right? So how one can promote psychological safety and what are the benefits of having a climate of safety within a team, right? And then we will talk about how or what role leaders can play in this process, right? And lastly, how establishing clear norms can reduce the dysfunctional dynamics in a team. Now, as I said, that high psychological safety can actually mitigate the process losses that are associated with information and interest asymmetries within teams, right? So when groups have a climate of psychological safety, team members feel more comfortable asking questions, requesting clarifications, or inquiring about others' views, right? And individuals express and discuss dissenting views. People admit mistakes and they ask for help more frequently as well, right? So these behaviors can actually produce a much richer and more candid dialogue among team members, right? A higher level of cognitive conflict emerges. By cognitive conflict means the conflict over the goals or content of a task, right? Which is always positive, which is always a positive force in any team or a group, right? So high psychological safety therefore results in broader and freer exchange of information. Right here, groups surface and discuss privately held information, which was the problem with information asymmetry. Right? They feel safe enough to discuss that privately held information rather than, dwelling disproportionately on the knowledge held by all the members. Right? And how psychological safety can also solve the problem of conflicting goals. Individuals, must feel comfortable speaking up, and they must trust their colleagues in order to reveal their personal interest and objectives, right? And candid revelation of personal preferences help group members identify their common objectives, right? And this psychological safety increases the probability that team members may come up with creative ideas that might, resolve some areas of goal conflict. Please mute yourself, Anil. Right? So some ideas may also surface that enable group members to discover courses of action that are mutually beneficial, right? Which can help each members perform or achieve some part of their personal goals as well while working towards the common goal, right? But if team lacks psychological safety, the members may play things close to the vest and focus, their intent on the advancement of their personal agenda. Right? Value creating behaviors may not emerge and value claiming behaviors may dominate. Now, so this clearly, demonstrates how important is psychological safety in any team. Now, coming to how you can build psychological safety, how you can enhance team psychological safety. Now here, as I said, leaders have a very important role. Right? How can leaders build a climate of safety within a team? So there are certain ways that have been suggested where leaders can actually, promote such a climate within a team. So if you see, leaders can acknowledge their own fallibility, right? So by admitting their vulnerabilities and mistakes, leaders can encourage others to be more candid. Right? And then what else leaders can do is leaders also can try to reduce the salience of status differences. right? So I talked about one of the important process laws that can happen because of the status differences among the members, right? So people need to feel as though they are equal partners in the discussion, right? Because team may consist of individuals from different hierarchical levels. Although while constituting teams, this point should be kept in mind that there are minimal status differences among members, because status differences can actually inhibit diverse and creative ideas within a team.
हे पण एक वर्कशॉप आहे. त्यात तुम्हाला चहा देताना संध्याकाळी जरा बाहेर येतोय. आता लॅपटॉप वरती बघ.
Mr. Anil, please mute your mic. If you have a question, we
Yeah,
can pick it up later. Yes, so people need to feel that they are equal partners in the discussion. And how you can ensure that as a team leader, you can, change the physical location of the meeting maybe. That may help to diminish status differences, because, a particular location, for example, if you are having a meeting in the boardroom of a company, right? So that can reinforce the hierarchical distinctions and associated rules of protocol. Right, so changing the place of meeting also can help you reduce such or diminish such status differences among the members, so that members can be more free to share their views. Right, then what else leaders can do is leaders must set an appropriate tone for discussion, particularly with regard to language. So a leader can, police the words that people use when critiquing one another's ideas, so as to ensure that, individuals do not become alienated. So to give you an example here, for example, in the heat of a battle, a team member may say to a colleague, why would you propose such a harebrained idea? Right? So a leader may intervene to encourage a different framing of question, such as, help me understand why you believe we should proceed in that manner. Right? And then apart from, policing certain words that people use while, critiquing others, leaders can also encourage multiple channels of communication. Why? Because, some individuals may feel more comfortable expressing themselves in one-on-one interactions or in subgroups rather than the full team meetings. Right? So by doing so, the leader will be able to encourage such quieter members to come up and speak and consider their views. Right? And then apart from, using multiple channels of communication, leader can also make use of, certain structured tools for decision making. What are these structural techniques for, decision making? They can be, making use of dialectical inquiry or devil's advocate. So I'll talk about these. So let us talk about devil's advocate. So leader can actually try to balance the power of experts in the team by bringing in an unbiased outsider who can question the majority views to, counterbalance the effect of an internal expert who may be dominating the team discussion. Right? So by bringing in an unbiased outsider who can act as a devil's advocate, leader can actually prevent some members from dominating the discussion, because of which other members may feel insecure in sharing their views. Right? And then leaders can also lead by example. For example, a leader can, can increase psychological safety by celebrating the instances of courageous behavior. For example, if an individual admits that he or she made a mistake, or if an individual asks for help, right? So leader may wish to thank that person publicly for stepping forward. Right? So by rewarding such candid behaviors, right, where members can come up and speak up openly about their mistakes or ask help if they actually need it during the team task, right? So by making it clear that such valorous behavior promotes team learning and improvement, a leader can actually bolster the level of psychological safety within a group. Right? So, and what other ways leaders can actually enhance psychological safety or improve the level of information sharing? So you must have heard about the technique called as a leaderless group discussion. Right? So a leader may want to remove himself or herself from group discussion at times so as to promote more frank discussion. Right? Because when boss is away, individuals may try to say what they think. They may try to share their actual views rather than what the leader wants to hear. Right? So they can engage in more open dialogue if given the opportunity to interact without their leaders present. That's why this particular technique is used, leaderless group discussions in, assessment centers. Right, so this clearly demonstrates that, when the opportunity for substantial process losses exists, right, the challenges that I just discussed, the individuals need to be more attuned to the importance of group processes, right? And the role of leader becomes paramount here, right? So leaders must develop a climate of psychological safety, right? And they must help the group arrive at a process for solving tough problems, right? And the leader must ensure broad participation, right? Because the leader ultimately bears the responsibility for producing, a constructive dialogue that surfaces all relevant information and interests. Right? And effective leaders can provoke the disclosure and discussion of privately held information, and they can ensure that, value claiming behavior do not crowd out the value creating behaviors. Right? Now, the role of leader is not limited to, promoting psychological safety. Right? So for a leader to manage a team process effectively, they should be able to manage the group processes well. Right? So they should be able to determine whether members share information freely, explore common interest, and identify opportunities for mutual gain. Right? So when asymmetric information exists, leaders will have to intervene actively in the discussion so as to encourage people to share information, and they must engage in active listening. Right? So appropriate behaviors that leaders can adopt may, include techniques such as playback techniques, right? Playing back other statements so as to ensure that they have been heard and understood. For example, if somebody says something and he is not, his views do not catch the attention of others, in that case, a leader might say that, I think that you said X and Y. Have I understood you clearly? So this playback technique actually proves specially helpful when some comments do not seem to catch attention of others, or perhaps, some members prematurely dismiss certain ideas for one reason or the other. Right? And as I said, leaders can also adopt some of the structured techniques for decision making, like dialectical inquiry and devil's advocacy methods. Right? So what is dialectical inquiry here? It involves creation of two subgroups to generate alternatives, or to exchange proposal, or to critique one another ideas. Right? So such techniques help to actually surface privately held information. People do not have to stand up alone in the large team meeting. Right? Instead, the subgroup becomes the entity responsible for expressing a dissenting view. Right? Quieter members, they actually feel safety in numbers effect. Right? So now they do not have to stand alone. It is the subgroup that will present a dissenting view. Right? So that's how you can pool in the information of such quieter members, right? And devil's advocate, as I already explained, they make it difficult for someone to cling to their own interest exclusively at the expense of the common goals, right? But there are certain situations, there are extreme circumstances where, the conflict level is so high in the team that it leads to a stalemate, right? So in such conditions, right, where affective conflict or relationship conflict is so high and there is so much of dysfunctional behavior in a team, right? So then a leader may have to exert more control over the final decision, right? So when personal goals clash, the leaders will need to uh, become more like an arbitrator, right? He need to consider opposing arguments and then making a decision that he or she believes will advance the team's overarching goals and objectives. But here procedural justice is very important. If a leader takes a lead and makes a decision, right, he needs to ensure that the process that he adopts to take a decision is fair and equitable, and he should carefully explain the rationale for taking final decision to all the team members, right? So this important is the role of a leader in a team process. Now lastly, establishing clear norms, right? So importance of norms. So what we saw, one of the important problems with norms in a group is conformity pressures, right? So destructive dynamics because of such unclear norms can actually undermine collaborative efforts, right? So team members can withhold information, they can pressure people to confirm and avoid responsibility, they can cast blame and so on, right? So one of the important thing that can be done here so as to avoid such problems or to reduce such potential for dysfunction is by establishing clear norms, the rules that actually spell out a small number of things that members must always do, right? Small things such as, arrive in meetings on times or give everyone a turn to speak. If these small things become the norms in a group, right, then all such consequent problems can be avoided, right? So they should be given a clear directives on what small things that they must always do and small thing they must never do. For example, interrupting others while speaking, right? So such small step can actually make a difference. Instilling such norms is, it becomes really important when team members operate across different regional, national, or, organizational cultures, because they may not all have the same view of particular norm. For example, the importance of punctuality may not be the same in all cultures or organizations, right? And in teams whose membership is fluid, where members keep on changing regularly, right? In that case, explicitly reiterating norms at regular intervals can actually help, right? And in one of the models by, Hackman, the extension model of Hackman, I talked about shared mindset, right? So shared mindset can be achieved only through establishing clear identity and common understanding, right? So how to establish team identity? What can leader do in this direction? One powerful approach is to ensure that each subgroup feels valued for its contribution towards the team's overall goal. This can prevent this us versus them mentality in different departments, in a cross-functional team, in a team, or in any kind of team where there is us versus them mentality, right? And also, in order to, when teams are, widely dispersed or digitally connected, right? In that case, one of the other approaches that is done to make the members understand each other well is called as structured unstructured time, right? So that is the time blocked off in a schedule to talk about the matters not directly related to the task at hand, right? So this is usually done by reserving first uh, 10 minutes of a meeting, for example, for open discussion, right? So the idea here is to basically provide an opportunity to the members to converse about whatever aspects of their work or daily life that they choose, such as office politics or family or personal events, right? So this helps people develop a more complete picture of the distant colleagues, their work and their environment, right? So this technique can also help. So this was all about the team effectiveness variables, team challenges, and possible solutions. So before I close my session, I'd like to share a small story with you, which you may already be aware of, the tortoise and the hare story, right? So bear with me. I'm repeating the same thing that you already know. So once upon a time, a tortoise and hare had an argument about who was faster, right? So hare said, "I am the fastest runner," and the tortoise said, "That's not true. The fastest runner is me," right? And then they decided to settle the argument with a race, and they agreed on a route and started off the race, right? So hare said, "Okay, let's have a race," and then tortoise also agreed to it, right? So the hare shot ahead and ran briskly for some time. Then, seeing that he was far ahead of tortoise, he thought that he would sit under a tree for some time and relax before continuing the race, right? So he thought that tortoise is a poor guy. Even if he takes a nap, he could not catch up with me, right? So he sat under a tree and then soon fell asleep. And the tortoise, plodding on, overtook him and soon finished the race, emerging as the undisputed champ, right? The hare woke up and realized that he had lost the race. So what's the morale of the story? That slow and steady wins the race, right? So this is the version of the story that we have all grown up with, right? But the story continues. So the hare was disappointed as losing the race, and he did some soul searching. He realized that he had lost the race only because he had been overconfident, careless, and lax, right? So if he had not taken things for granted, there is no way the tortoise could have beaten him. So why did I lose the race? Right? So he challenged the tortoise to another race, and the tortoise agreed. Now, this time the hare went all out and ran without stopping from start to finish, right? And he won by several miles, right? So what's the moral of the story here is fast and consistent will always beat the slow and steady, right? So this relates to the ability of team members, right? So the team's potential to perform is highly dependent on how able the members are, right? So it's good to be slow and steady, but it's better to be fast and reliable. But again, the story does not end here, right? Again, the tortoise did some thinking this time and realized that there is no way he can beat hare in a race that the way it was currently formatted. So how can I win the race, hare thought. So he thought for a while and then challenged the hare on another race, but on a slightly different route. And the hare agreed, right? So they started off, and in keeping with his self-made commitment to be consistently fast, the hare took off and ran at top speed until he came to a broad river, right? So the finishing line was a couple of kilometers on the other side of the river. So the hare sat there wondering what to do. In the meantime, the tortoise trundled along, got into the river, swam to the opposite bank, continued walking, and finished the race. Right? So now what's the morale of the story? So first identify your core competency and then change the playing field to suit your core competency. Right? Again, the story still has not ended. The hare and the tortoise, by this time they had become pretty good friends and they did some thinking together. Both realized that the last race could have been run much better, right? So they decided to do the last race again, but to run as a team this time. So they started off, and this time the hare carried the tortoise till the river bank, There the tortoise took over and swam across with the hare on his back. On the opposite bank, the hare again carried the tortoise and they reached the finishing line together. They both felt a great sense of satisfaction than they had felt earlier. Right? So what's the morale of the story? It's good to be individually brilliant and to have strong core competencies. But unless you are able to work in a team and harness each other's core competencies, you will always perform below par, because there will always be situations at which you will do poorly and someone else does well. Right? So you can clearly understand through this theory that teamwork is mainly about situational leadership. Right? Here, the hare and tortoise had different core competencies. Right? And in the last race, they allowed the person with the relevant competency to take the charge of a situation. Right? So that's why I made a statement in my presentation that teams with shared leadership approach are more effective as compared to the traditional single leader model. Right? So you must have seen, geese flying in the air. So they always move in team and each member acts as a leader. They always move in V formation. So you can read more about that, and the movement of geese can actually teach you good lessons on team management. So with this, I would like to close here. So let's go build, participate in, and lead strong teams. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions for Dr. Richa Chaudhary, please go ahead.
Smriti ji, I'm not able to maximize the screen.
I think if you stop sharing.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So the floor is open for questions. Any question? If you don't have questions, then we'll wind up the session. It's been a long day for everyone, right from 10 in the morning. So thank you, Dr. Richa, for this very informative session. I'm sure our participants have gained some knowledge about team building, and hopefully they go richer back to their workplace. Thanks a lot.
I'm sorry I could not conduct any team building exercise here, because all such exercises are meant to be conducted in a physical classroom situation. So maybe I'll think more about it and we can do something online. Then maybe next time I'll be able to include that as well in my session.
To do the practical parts online.
Yeah.
Anyway, by next time, I think we'll probably do something again. So thank you so much, Dr. Richa. Have a good day.
Yeah, so before I close, I'd like to thank Dr. Smriti and Dr. Shweta for, organizing FDP on such a relevant theme. Thank you, Dr. Smriti. Congratulations on conducting such a well-organized program, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Dr. Richa. See you tomorrow at 1:30 to relieve some stress.
Sure.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
So ladies and gentlemen, we call it a day. I've circulated the attendance link. Please fill that. And we'll see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock for the session on meditation.